Rachel Okonkwo had been drifting through empty space for 3 days when the distress beacon finally appeared on her scanner. She sat up in her pilot seat, rubbing sleep from her eyes. The signal was weak, automated, the kind that only activated when life support dropped below critical levels. She changed course immediately, her small research vessel responding to her commands with familiar precision. The source was a xenobiology station orbiting a green and blue planet called Talos 7. Rachel knew the place by reputation. Scientists went there to study gentle creatures, the kind that had never learned to fear anything because their world had nothing to fear. It was supposed to be the safest posting in this entire sector. As her ship approached, Rachel felt her stomach tighten. The station hung silent against the planet's curve. No lights blinked in greeting. No communication channels answered her hails. She ran a scan and found minimal power, life support at 20%, and worst of all, the orbit was degrading. The station had maybe 2 days before it burned up in the atmosphere below. She docked manually, her hands steady on the controls despite the worry gnawing at her chest. The airlock accepted her codes without issue, which meant the main computer still functioned. That was something at least. Rachel sealed her suit, checked her emergency supplies, and entered the station. The corridors were dark except for emergency lighting that cast everything in dim red. Her footsteps echoed too loudly in the silence. Rachel had responded to abandoned stations before, but they always left her uneasy. She checked each room as she passed, looking for survivors, for answers, for anything that would explain what happened here. She found the main research lab first. Equipment sat idle, data screens frozen mid-analysis. A cold cup of some purple beverage sat beside a keyboard. Whoever had been here left in a hurry, but there were no signs of violence, no damage, no blood, just absence. Rachel accessed the nearest terminal and pulled up the station logs. Her translator struggled with some of the Marathi script, but she got the basics. Medical emergency, evacuation order, relief ship dispatched. Estimated arrival 6 days ago, 6 days. Rachel felt her heart sink. The relief ship never came. She continued deeper into the station, following the life support readings to their strongest point. The signals led her to a sealed section marked with symbols her translator rendered as nursery juvenile care. Rachel approached the door carefully. Through the small viewport window, she could see movement inside. Her breath caught. Survivors. 4 of them, small and huddled together in the far corner of the room. Cubs, she realized, Marathi children, left behind when the adults evacuated. She moved closer to the window, relief flooding through her. They were alive, scared clearly, but alive. She raised her hand to wave to show them help had arrived. All 4 cubs saw her face in the window at the same time. The reaction was instant and terrifying. The largest cub, probably the eldest, let out a sound that Rachel's suit microphones barely captured. It was high-pitched, desperate, a warning cry that made every hair on her body stand up. The other 3 scattered behind him, pressing themselves against the far wall so hard they seemed to be trying to merge with it. The smallest cub went completely still, frozen in terror. Another made a keening noise that sounded like sobbing. The third, despite its fear, kept its eyes locked on Rachel's face, tracking her every movement. Rachel stepped back from the window, confused. She checked her suit's external speakers, made sure they were working. She spoke gently, calmly. "Hey, it's okay. I'm here to help. You're safe now." The eldest cub's response was to bare its teeth and push the others further behind him. His whole body shook, but he stood his ground, protective despite his obvious terror. Rachel frowned and accessed her suit's computer, pulling up the xenobiology files on the Marathi species. As she read, understanding dawned with uncomfortable clarity. The Marathi evolved on Talos 7, a world without predators. Nothing on their planet had ever hunted them. Their fear responses were primitive, based on ancient genetic memories from before they became the dominant species. They had instincts, yes, but no real experience with actual danger. Until now. Until they saw a human face looking through their window. Rachel read the biological markers that Marathi instincts recognized as predatory threats. Forward-facing eyes, binocular vision, smooth tracking movements, bipedal stance, height advantage. The list went on, and humans checked every single box. To these cubs, she wasn't a rescuer. She was the most dangerous thing their species' collective memory could imagine. She was an apex predator, and she was standing between them and any possible escape route. Rachel checked the time. 48 hours until orbital decay. She looked back through the window. One of the middle cubs, the curious one, was watching her with wide eyes. Fear-scent glands on all 4 cubs were working overtime, releasing pheromones that probably smelled like panic to each other. She noticed something else then. Supplies stacked near the door unopened. Food packets, water containers, emergency rations. Everything the cubs needed to survive right there within reach. But the door controls were on the outside, and the cubs had clearly been too terrified to even approach the door, let alone try to open it. How long had they been without food? Without water? Rachel examined the cubs more carefully through the window. 3 of them looked thin but alert. The 4th, one of the smaller ones lying against the wall, barely moved. She enhanced her suit's medical scanner and aimed it through the window. The readings made her curse softly. Infection. Fever. Advanced dehydration. That cub needed medical attention now, not in 2 days, not in 2 hours now. But how could she help when her mere presence sent them into blind panic? Rachel sat down on the floor outside the nursery door, making herself smaller, less threatening. She pulled up every file she had on Marathi development, on fear responses, on juvenile psychology. Somewhere in all this data had to be an answer. The station groaned around her, metal stressed by atmospheric friction beginning to heat the outer hull. Time was running out. Through the window, the eldest cub kept his eyes fixed on her position, protecting his family from the monster outside their door. Rachel felt a wave of respect for the little one's courage even as her mind raced for solutions. She couldn't force them. Sedation would be dangerous given their elevated stress levels. Their small hearts were already working overtime with fear. Add chemicals to that mix and she might stop those hearts entirely. No, she needed their trust. Somehow, impossibly, she needed to make these terrified children understand that the predator at their door had come to save them, not to hunt them. Rachel looked at the sick cub again, watched its shallow breathing, saw how the others kept touching it with worried gestures. Time was the one thing she didn't have, and trust was the one thing that couldn't be rushed. She began to formulate a plan, desperate and uncertain, but it was all she had. She would speak their language not with words, but with actions they might understand. She would show them that monsters could choose to be something else. The station groaned again, louder this time. 47 hours and counting. Rachel took a deep breath and began to work. The xenobiology database had more information than Rachel expected. She sat cross-legged outside the nursery door, her tablet propped against her knee, reading everything she could find about Marathi childhood development. The cubs inside had gone quiet, though she could see them still huddled together through the window watching her with terrified eyes. Marathi cubs developed their fear responses early, the files explained. It was an evolutionary holdover from a time when their ancestors were smaller, more vulnerable. But something interesting caught her attention. The files mentioned imprinting, how young Marathi learned to recognize safe patterns in their first years of life. Movement patterns, sound frequencies, even scent markers. Humans had none of those patterns. Worse, humans had all the wrong patterns. Rachel scrolled through behavioral studies looking for anything useful. She found a section on comfort responses, the ways adult Marathi calmed frightened young. It involved specific sounds, humming at particular frequencies, rocking motions that mimicked the movement of walking. Touch when allowed in certain gentle patterns. She could work with this. Rachel stood slowly, making sure the cubs could see every movement. She removed her helmet first, letting them see her face fully. The eldest cub, the brave one, made that warning sound again, but quieter this time, fear mixed with confusion. She set the helmet aside and unsealed her jacket, removing it carefully, making herself smaller, less armored, more vulnerable. It went against every instinct for dealing with scared animals, but these weren't animals. They were children, intelligent and aware, just trapped by instincts they didn't understand. Rachel sat back down, closer to the window now. She pulled up an audio file from the database, a recording of Marathi comfort sounds. She listened once, twice, memorizing the pattern. Then she began to hum. The sound was low, rhythmic, rising and falling in waves that felt strange in her throat. The cub's ears perked up instantly. The smallest one, the frozen one, turned its head slightly. The curious cub took half a step forward before the eldest grabbed it back. Rachel kept humming, adding a gentle rocking motion to her body. Back and forth the same tempo as the sound. The database said this mimicked how Marathi mothers walked when carrying young. She felt ridiculous sitting on a cold station floor humming and swaying. But the cubs were watching now with something other than pure terror. Confusion was better than panic. She would take confusion. After 10 minutes, her throat started to hurt, but she didn't stop. She opened the station's food storage interface on her tablet, ordering emergency rations to be delivered to this section. A small panel beside the door beeped, and a drawer extended outward with several meal packets inside. Rachel took the packets carefully, holding them where the cubs could see. She placed them in the small pass-through drawer built into the nursery door, the kind meant for delivering supplies without opening the main entrance. Then she pushed the drawer through to the inside and immediately moved away, crossing to the far side of the corridor. The eldest cub watched her retreat. His body language screamed suspicion, but hunger was clearly fighting with fear. Rachel kept humming, kept rocking, making herself non-threatening. 5 minutes passed. 10. The cubs whispered to each other in their own language, sounds too soft for her suit's translator to catch. Finally, the eldest made a decision. He crept forward, eyes locked on Rachel, ready to bolt at the slightest movement. He grabbed the packets with one quick motion and scrambled back to the others. Rachel wanted to cheer but kept her reaction calm. She just nodded slightly and continued her humming. The cubs tore into the food with desperate hunger. They hadn't eaten in days, that much was obvious. Rachel felt anger rise in her chest, not at them, but at the situation. At the relief ship that never came. At the adults who had no choice but to leave their young behind. At a galaxy that could let children starve because they were too afraid to save themselves. She accessed the station logs again while the cubs ate, digging deeper into what happened. The picture became clearer and uglier. A virulent illness had swept through the adult staff, something that affected Marathi physiology but was harmless to the cubs' different immune systems. The evacuation was immediate, necessary. The adults were dying and needed treatment the station couldn't provide. The relief ship was supposed to arrive within hours. Should have arrived within hours. Something went wrong and no one came. Rachel looked at the cubs again. The curious one was making small chirping sounds now, different from the fear cries. The translator offered a tentative meaning. Location awareness, the sound young made to keep track of each other in darkness or confusion. It was making those sounds at her, trying to understand where she fit in its mental map of safe and unsafe things. Progress. Tiny, fragile progress. The sick cub still hadn't moved to eat. The others tried to bring food to it, pushing packets close to its mouth, but it just lay there breathing shallowly. Rachel's medical scanner put the fever at dangerous levels. Infection spreading from what looked like a cut on its leg, probably sustained during the panic of the evacuation. She had maybe 12 hours before that cub's condition became critical. 12 hours to build enough trust that she could enter that room and provide medical care. It seemed impossible. Rachel pulled up video files from the station's security cameras, footage from before the evacuation. She watched the cubs playing with their caretakers, saw them laugh and tumble and explore with fearless joy. The eldest cub, her brave protector, had been confident and outgoing. The smallest had been curious about everything, always asking questions in their chirping language. The curious one had loved to climb, getting into spaces it shouldn't. And the sick one had been gentle, always the first to comfort others when they were upset. They were just kids. Smart, sweet kids who had been abandoned by circumstances beyond their control. Rachel thought about her own daughter, gone 5 years now. She thought about the feeling of helplessness, watching someone you love suffer and being unable to help. These cubs probably felt the same way about their sick sibling. Scared, confused, wanting desperately to make things better but not knowing how. She stopped humming for a moment and spoke, knowing they wouldn't understand the words but hoping they might understand the tone. I know you're scared. I know I look like something terrible to you, but that little one needs help, and I'm the only one here who can give it. So I need you to trust me. Just a little bit, just enough. Please. The eldest cub tilted its head, listening. The curious one chirped again, that location awareness sound. The smallest one was still frozen, but its eyes tracked Rachel's movements with slightly less panic. Progress. The station's orbital alert chimed. 42 hours remaining. Rachel acknowledged it and turned back to the window. The cubs had finished eating and were grooming each other, a sign of emotional comfort. The eldest kept glancing at her, then at the sick cub, then back at her. He was thinking, weighing options, trying to solve an impossible problem with the limited understanding of a frightened child. Rachel made a decision. She would give them the night to adjust to her presence. She would stay here, visible, non-threatening, continuing her humming and rocking. Let them sleep or try to, with the monster outside keeping watch instead of attacking. Show them through patience that maybe their instincts were wrong about her. Tomorrow, if the sick cub worsened, she would have to make a harder choice. But tonight she would wait. Rachel settled against the corridor wall, wrapped her jacket around herself for warmth, and resumed the Marathi comfort sounds. Through the window, 4 pairs of eyes watched her in the darkness, fear slowly giving way to exhausted uncertainty. It was a start. Rachel woke to the sound of whimpering. She had dozed off sometime during the night, her head resting against the cold corridor wall. Through the nursery window she could see the 3 healthy cubs huddled around the sick one, making distressed sounds that needed no translation. She checked her medical scanner. The sick cub's fever had spiked. The infection was spreading faster than she had hoped. Maybe 8 hours left before it became life-threatening. Maybe less. Rachel stood, her muscles stiff from sleeping on the floor. The cubs startled at her movement, but they didn't scatter this time. The eldest positioned himself between her and the others, protective as always. But he was watching her with something new in his eyes. Not trust, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding that she had stayed all night without attacking. She needed to accelerate the bonding process. Time was a luxury she didn't have. Rachel accessed the xenobiology database again, searching for anything she might have missed. She found a section on Marathi developmental psychology, how cubs learned complex concepts. They were remarkably intelligent, capable of abstract thought even at young ages. They understood cause and effect, could recognize patterns, could even grasp basic concepts of reciprocity. An idea formed in her mind. Risky, unconventional, but possible. She opened the supply drawer again, loading it with more food packets, water containers, and something else. A medical scanner simplified to show basic health readings with color codes. Green for healthy, yellow for concerning, red for dangerous. Rachel pushed the drawer through and retreated. The eldest cub approached cautiously, examined the supplies. He distributed food and water to his siblings, then picked up the scanner with obvious confusion. Rachel pulled out her own scanner and held it up where he could see. She pointed it at herself, let the holographic display show her vital signs in green. Healthy. She made a show of looking at it, nodding, then setting it aside. The cub watched her, head tilted. He looked at his scanner, then at his sick sibling. Rachel saw the moment understanding clicked. He pointed the device at the sick cub and the display lit up red. Dangerous. He made a sound of distress, looking from the scanner to Rachel and back again. She nodded slowly, then pulled out a medical kit from her supplies. She held up each item where he could see. Antiseptic, bandages, fever reducers. She mimed treating a wound on her own arm, making her actions large and clear. The eldest cub watched intently. Then he did something that made Rachel's heart clench. He held up the medical scanner toward her and made a questioning sound. His meaning was clear. "Can you help?" Rachel nodded. She pointed to the sick cub, then to herself, then made a gentle healing motion. The eldest cub trembled, fear warring with desperation in his small body. His sibling was dying and the monster at the door was offering to help. He looked back at the others. The curious one chirped softly. That location awareness sound again, but this time it sounded almost like encouragement. The smallest one was still frozen, but its eyes were fixed on the sick cub with obvious distress. The eldest made a decision. He moved to the door controls and stared at them, clearly not knowing how to open it from the inside. The doors were designed to be controlled externally, a safety feature that now trapped them. Rachel held up her hand, stopping him. Not yet. She wasn't ready to enter, and they weren't ready to let her. She needed to build just a little more trust, just enough to prevent complete panic. She sat back down and resumed her humming, that Marathi comfort sound. But this time she added something new. She pulled up videos of Marathi caretakers interacting with cubs, watched how they moved, how they touched, how they communicated comfort. She mimicked the head movements, the gentle swaying, the soft vocalizations. The cubs stared at her. The apex predator was speaking their language. badly probably, with terrible accent and poor grammar, but unmistakably trying to communicate in ways they understood. The curious cub crept closer to the window. It made a sound, and Rachel's translator offered, "Strange." The cub repeated it several times, pointing at her. Strange. Not dangerous, not threat, but strange. The categorization was different, important. Rachel kept up her performance, feeling foolish but seeing results. She added hand gestures she had seen in the videos, movements that meant safe, calm, friend. She had no idea if she was doing them correctly, but the cubs were engaged now, watching with fascination instead of terror. The smallest one finally unfroze. It made a tiny sound, barely audible, and took one small step toward the window. The curious one chirped at it, encouraging. Even the eldest had relaxed slightly, though his protective stance never wavered. Rachel checked the time. 36 hours until orbital decay. She looked at the sick cub. Its breathing was getting worse. She made another decision. She would give them one more hour to adjust and accept. Then she would have to enter, ready or not. The sick cub couldn't wait any longer. She used that hour to prepare. She spoke constantly, narrating every action so they could hear her voice and grow accustomed to it. She showed them medical supplies, demonstrated each tool's purpose on herself. She played more videos of Marathi caretakers, pointing between the videos and herself, trying to show, "I am like them. I want to help like them." The eldest cub watched everything. He was smart, Rachel could see that. He was putting pieces together, fighting his instincts with his intellect. Several times he looked like he wanted to ask questions, making aborted sounds that never quite formed into words. The curious cub pressed its face against the window, studying Rachel's features. It reached out one paw and touched the glass where her hand rested on the other side. Not quite contact, but almost, a bridge beginning to form. The hour passed too quickly. The sick cub's breathing became labored, wheezing with each exhale. The other cubs huddled closer, their distress calls increasing in frequency and pitch. Rachel stood. She moved to the door controls. The cub saw her hand reach for the panel, and panic rippled through them. The eldest positioned himself in front of the others, baring his teeth, his whole body shaking but refusing to back down. Rachel paused. She looked at this brave little cub, this child trying to protect his family from something he had every reason to fear, and she felt overwhelming respect for his courage. She pressed her palm against the window, fingers spread. The eldest stared at her hand, at the very human gesture of open vulnerability. Then Rachel did something no predator would do, something that went against every hunting instinct any species had ever evolved. She closed her eyes and bowed her head, exposing her neck. The ultimate prey signal, the universal sign of submission and trust. For a long moment, nothing happened. Rachel kept her eyes closed, her heart pounding, trusting these frightened children not to panic while she made herself vulnerable. Then she heard it. The soft sound of a paw touching glass. She opened her eyes. The eldest cub had approached the window and placed his paw against hers, separated only by the transparent barrier. He was still terrified, still shaking, but he was choosing to trust despite his fear. Rachel smiled gently. She moved her hand to the door controls and paused, giving him time to retreat if he wanted. He didn't. He stayed at the window watching her, one paw still pressed against the glass. She opened the door. The 3 healthy cubs scrambled backward, but they didn't flee to the far corner this time. The eldest held his ground in the middle of the room. The curious one watched from a few feet away. Even the smallest one stayed relatively close, though it trembled so hard its fur rippled. Rachel stepped through the doorway slowly, keeping her movements predictable. She lowered herself to her knees immediately, making herself smaller, less threatening. She kept humming that comfort sound, kept her hands visible and empty except for the medical kit. She looked at the eldest cub and held up the kit, asking permission without words. He glanced at his sick sibling, at Rachel, then back again. The weight of the decision pressed visible on his young shoulders. Finally, he stepped aside. Just one step, but it was enough. It was permission. It was trust. Rachel crawled forward toward the sick cub, moving slowly, humming constantly. The cub barely responded to her approach, too fevered to register much of anything. Rachel opened the medical kit, pulled out the scanner for a detailed reading. Bad. Worse than she thought. The infection had spread significantly. She needed to work fast. She looked back at the eldest cub and showed him what she was seeing on the scanner. She pointed to the readings, to the wound, to the medical supplies. She tried to convey, "I understand the problem. I can fix it. Please let me try." The eldest cub moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel his body heat, could smell the fear scent still coming from his glands. He was watching everything she did with intense focus. Rachel began to work, cleaning the wound, applying antiseptic, injecting anti-inflammatory medicine. She narrated every step in soft, calm tones. The sick cub whimpered once but didn't pull away. It didn't have the strength left to resist. The other cubs crowded around, watching with wide eyes as the predator healed instead of harmed. Rachel bandaged the wound carefully, then administered fever reducers and started an IV drip for fluids. Standard emergency medicine, but probably magical from the cub's perspective. When she finished, she checked the scanner again. The readings were still red, but less urgently so. The treatment would take time to work, but the cub would survive now. It would recover. Rachel sat back on her heels and smiled at the eldest cub. He stared at his sibling, at the bandages, at the medical equipment, trying to process what had just happened. The curious cub chirped suddenly, that strange sound again, but this time it sounded almost like wonder. It took a hesitant step toward Rachel. Then another. Then it reached out one paw and touched her hand where it rested on the floor. Rachel froze, barely breathing. The small paw was warm against her skin, trembling, but real. Contact. Actual, willing contact. The cub pulled back quickly, startled by its own bravery, but it didn't flee. It just watched her, head tilted, processing this new information. The monster had warm skin. The predator had gentle hands. The apex creature had chosen to heal instead of harm. Maybe their instincts were wrong after all. The sick cub's fever broke 2 hours later. Rachel stayed in the nursery the whole time, monitoring the medical readings, adjusting the IV flow, keeping watch. The other 3 cubs maintained their distance, but it was a comfortable distance now, observation rather than terror. When the sick one's eyes fluttered open, the first thing it saw was Rachel's face. The reaction was immediate. It screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure panic, and tried to scramble backward. The IV line pulled taut, and Rachel quickly steadied the stand to prevent it from falling. The other cubs rushed over, making soothing sounds, pressing close to their sibling. The eldest positioned himself between Rachel and the sick one, falling back into his protective role. But something was different this time. He wasn't preparing to fight or flee. He was trying to explain something. Rachel watched, fascinated, as the eldest made a series of gestures and sounds. He pointed to Rachel, to the medical equipment, to the bandaged wound. The sick cub's panic subsided to confused fear. It looked at the bandage on its leg, at the IV in its arm, at Rachel sitting calmly a few feet away. The curious cub joined, in chirping and touching the sick one's bandage gently, then touching Rachel's medical kit. Even the smallest cub contributed, making soft comfort sounds and pressing against its sibling's other side. They were explaining, telling the story of what happened, how the scary human had come inside and healed instead of hurt, how the monster had turned out to be something else entirely. The sick cub listened, its eyes darting between Rachel and its siblings. Understanding slowly replaced fear. It touched its bandaged leg gingerly, testing. The pain was less. Rachel could see it in the way the cub moved. The fever fog was lifting. It was thinking clearly again. It looked at Rachel for a long moment. Then, so quietly Rachel almost missed it, the cub made a sound. The translator offered, "Thank you." Rachel felt her throat tighten. She nodded and smiled. "You're welcome." The sick cub tilted its head, studying her face. It seemed fascinated by how her features moved when she smiled. Slowly, carefully, it lifted one paw and waved it in front of Rachel's face, watching how her eyes tracked the movement. Testing the binocular vision that had scared it so badly before, Rachel held still and let the cub explore. The others watched with interest. The curious one crept closer, emboldened by its sibling's bravery. It reached out and touched Rachel's hand again, more confidently this time. Its small claws were sharp but retracted, gentle. The eldest cub made a decision. He walked directly up to Rachel and sat down in front of her. He looked her straight in the eyes, something prey species usually avoided with predators, and made a complex sound. The translator struggled, offering, "Safe pack? Safe family?" Rachel understood. He was asking if she was part of their group now, if the protection went both ways, if the predator had become family. She thought about her answer carefully. These cubs would be reunited with their own people soon, taken back to their families and their world. She was just a temporary guardian, a bridge through crisis. But for now, for these next crucial hours, she could be their safe pack. She could be the one who stayed. "Yes," she said clearly. "Safe family. I protect you." The eldest seemed satisfied. He moved to sit beside Rachel, not quite touching, but close. The curious one climbed right into her lap, startling both of them. The cub froze, surprised by its own boldness. Rachel held very still. After a moment, the curious one relaxed, making itself comfortable against her leg, small body warm and trusting. The smallest cub watched all of this with wide eyes but still kept its distance. Some fears ran too deep to overcome quickly. Rachel understood. She didn't push. She just smiled at it gently and continued her soft humming. The sick cub tried to stand, wobbled, and Rachel reached out instinctively to steady it. The cub flinched but didn't pull away. It leaned against her hand for a moment, testing this new reality where the predator's touch meant help instead of harm. Rachel checked the medical scanner again. Readings were shifting from red to yellow. Improvement, steady and real. The cub would need rest and continued treatment, but it would survive. They would all survive. The station's orbital alert chimed. 24 hours until re-entry. Rachel acknowledged it and turned to the cubs. They couldn't stay here. She needed to get them to her ship into proper rescue equipment, ready for the long wait until proper authorities could retrieve them. The problem was simple but significant. Her ship's rescue pod was designed for adults, with restraints and safety systems sized for full-grown beings. The cubs would need special arrangements. More importantly, she would need to carry them, physically pick them up and transport them, which meant close contact, being held by the predator. Rachel stood slowly. The curious cub in her lap chirped in surprise as it slid to the floor. She moved to gather the supply pack she had brought, checking inventory. Survival suits, emergency rations, medical supplies, everything they would need. She turned to the eldest cub. He was watching her with that intelligent gaze, already sensing something was changing. Rachel knelt down to his level and tried to explain using gestures and simple words. "This place not safe," she said, pointing to the floor. "We go my ship. Safe there." She pointed in the direction of the docking bay. The eldest understood. He looked at his siblings, at the nursery that had been their prison and protection, then back at Rachel. He made a questioning sound, and she knew what he was asking. How? Rachel mimed picking up something, cradling it against her chest. The eldest's ears flattened. Being carried meant being vulnerable, completely at the mercy of whoever held you. Every instinct said it was dangerous, but he had already made so many impossible choices today. He looked at his injured sibling, still too weak to walk far. He looked at the smallest one, who would panic if left behind. He looked at the curious one who had already climbed into Rachel's lap once and survived. He made a sound of resignation. The translator offered, necessary fear. Fear that had to be faced because there was no other option. Rachel gathered the sick cub first. It was the logical choice, too weak to resist and in most need of getting to better medical facilities. She lifted it carefully, cradling it against her chest. The cub's whole body tensed, but the fever and exhaustion kept it from struggling. Rachel began humming that comfort sound again as she walked. The sick cub's heart was racing against her chest, fast and frightened, but gradually the rhythm of her steps and the familiar sound seemed to calm it. By the time they reached her ship, the cub had relaxed slightly, its head resting against her shoulder in exhausted trust. She secured it in the rescue pod, padding the two large restraints with blankets to keep it stable and comfortable. Then she made the long walk back to the nursery. The curious cub volunteered next. When Rachel entered the room, It came right up to her and made an expectant sound. "Show me," it seemed to say. "Show me what being carried by an apex predator feels like." Rachel lifted it gently. The cub weighed less than she expected, its body compact and sturdy. It gripped her shirt with its small claws, holding on, and made a series of rapid chirps. The translator struggled to keep up. "Hi, move fast, strange but good, can see far." The curious one was narrating its experience, Rachel realized. It was so fascinated by this new perspective that fear took a backseat to wonder. She smiled and carried it to the ship, listening to its constant commentary about every new thing it observed from human height. When she secured it next to its sibling, the curious cub immediately began telling the sick one all about the journey in excited chirps. Rachel left them talking and returned for the final two. The eldest met her at the nursery door. He squared his small shoulders, preparing himself. Rachel knelt down and held out her arms, letting him choose when to approach. He walked into her hold with visible effort, trembling from ear to tail. "Brave," Rachel said softly. "So brave." She lifted him carefully, feeling his heart hammering against her palm. This cub carried the weight of protecting his siblings, of making impossible decisions, of being strong when everything in him screamed to hide. He deserved gentleness. Rachel held him securely but loosely, letting him feel that he could move if needed, that he wasn't trapped. She talked to him the whole way to the ship, praising his courage, thanking him for trusting her. By the time they reached the rescue pod, he had stopped shaking. She settled him with the others, and he immediately began grooming his siblings, checking on them, reassuring himself they were all safe. Rachel smiled at the picture they made, 3 small cubs huddled together, beginning to relax now that they were reunited. One more trip, one more cub. The smallest one was exactly where Rachel had left it, pressed against the nursery wall. It hadn't moved the entire time. Now it was alone in the room, its siblings gone, carried away by the predator. Its fear was absolute. Rachel approached slowly. She sat down on the floor several feet away, not crowding. She began her humming again, that Marathi comfort sound she had learned. She rocked gently. She made herself as non-threatening as possible. The smallest cub whimpered. It was a sound of complete overwhelm. A child who had been through too much and couldn't process any more fear. Rachel felt her heart break a little. She had done this in a way. Not intentionally, but her very existence had traumatized this small being. Now she needed to carry it, to add more fear on top of fear already beyond bearing. The station shook suddenly, harder than before. Atmospheric friction increasing. They were running out of time. Rachel made a decision that went against all her emergency training. She lay down on the floor, flat on her back, and closed her eyes. Making herself completely vulnerable, showing that she could be harmless, could be safe. Minutes passed, 5, 10. The station groaned around them. Rachel didn't move. She kept humming, eyes closed, offering herself as a test. If the predator was dangerous, now was the moment to run. But if the predator was safe, if it could be trusted despite all instincts, Rachel felt a whisper of movement. The smallest cub was approaching so quietly she almost missed it. She kept her eyes closed, kept humming, a gentle touch on her hand, a sniff. The cub was investigating, gathering courage. More movement. The small body pressed against her side, seeking warmth, seeking comfort despite fear. Rachel slowly, very slowly, wrapped one arm around the cub. It tensed but didn't flee. She hummed louder, that comfort sound, and felt the moment when the cub's resistance crumbled into exhausted acceptance. "I've got you," Rachel whispered. "You're safe." She sat up carefully, cradling the smallest cub close. It buried its face against her shoulder, hiding from the world. Shaking but allowing itself to be held. They walked to the ship together, predator and prey, monster and child, finding trust in the spaces between fear. When Rachel secured the last cub in the rescue pod with its siblings, all 4 immediately huddled together, grooming and chirping and reassuring each other. They had been separated and reunited. They had been carried by the apex predator and survived. They had learned that sometimes the scariest thing in the universe chose to be gentle. Rachel sealed the pod and prepared her ship for departure. 20 hours until the station's fiery end. They had time. They were safe. The cubs would have a story to tell when they got home. A story about the day they learned that monsters could choose to be something else, that predators could protect, That fear and trust sometimes lived in the same moment. Rachel looked at the four small beings in her care and smiled. She would get them home. She would keep them safe. Because that's what humans did, even when the galaxy couldn't quite believe it. They were predators, yes, but they were so much more than that. Rachel's ship pulled away from the dying station with hours to spare. Through the viewport, she watched the orbital facility begin its slow tumble toward the planet below. In a few hours it would burn up in the atmosphere, erasing all evidence of the crisis that had unfolded there. But the four cubs sleeping in her rescue pod were proof enough that something important had happened in those metal corridors. She set course for the nearest communication relay, a journey of 3 days at her ship's modest speed. Once there, she could contact the Marathi authorities and arrange transfer of the cubs back to their families. 3 days. She needed to keep 4 traumatized children alive, calm and healthy for 3 days in close quarters with the creature they instinctively feared most. Rachel checked the rescue pod's monitoring systems. All 4 cubs were asleep, exhausted from stress and fear and the overwhelming events of the day. The sick one's readings continued to improve. The medical treatment was working. She allowed herself a moment to relax, sinking into her pilot seat with a tired sigh. Her ship was small but comfortable, designed for solo research missions. She had a tiny galley, a sleeping nook, storage compartments, and the rescue pod area where the cubs now rested. Everything she needed for long-duration work in isolated space. The ship's computer chimed softly. Course plotted, systems optimal, all green lights. Rachel acknowledged it and stood, stretching muscles sore from the long hours on the station floor. She needed food, water, and sleep. But first, she needed to prepare for 3 days with passengers who might wake up terrified. She pulled up her xenobiology files again, this time focusing on Marathi dietary needs. The cubs would need proper nutrition, not just emergency rations. She checked her stores. Protein supplements compatible with their biology, yes. Mineral additives, yes. Safe water with correct pH balance, yes. She had enough to feed them properly. Rachel prepared meal packs and placed them in a warming unit set to Marathi preferred temperature. She adjusted the rescue pod's environmental controls, raising the temperature and humidity to match Talos 7's climate. Small comforts that might help them feel less displaced. She was organizing medical supplies when she heard the first sounds from the rescue pod, soft chirping, the cubs waking and orienting themselves. Rachel moved to the viewport that let her see into the pod without entering it. She wanted to give them space to adjust before making her presence known. The eldest was awake first, immediately checking on his siblings. Finding them all present and safe seemed to ease his worry. The curious one woke next, instantly alert and investigating the new environment. It pressed its face against the transparent wall of the pod, looking out at the ship's interior with fascination. The sick one stirred slowly, still weak but clearly feeling better. It touched its bandaged leg experimentally, then looked around for Rachel. When it didn't see her immediately, it made a questioning sound. The smallest cub woke last, took one look around the unfamiliar space and made a sound of distress. The others immediately crowded around it, offering comfort. Rachel waited until their initial panic settled before making herself visible. She moved slowly into their line of sight, giving them time to register her presence. 4 pairs of eyes locked onto her instantly. The curious cub chirped and pressed harder against the transparent wall, trying to get closer to her. The eldest positioned himself protectively but without the desperate fear of before. The sick one made a soft sound that might have been greeting. The smallest cub hid behind its siblings but peeked out, watching. Progress. Real measurable progress. Rachel spoke softly. "Good morning. We're on my ship now, safe. I brought food if you're hungry." She held up the prepared meal packs where they could see. The eldest made an interested sound. The cubs were probably starving again. Young bodies needed frequent fuel, especially when recovering from stress. She opened the small access panel built into the rescue pod's wall and passed the food through. The eldest accepted it cautiously, distributed it to the others. They ate with better manners this time, less desperate, though still very hungry. While they ate, Rachel pulled up star charts and pointed them out to the cubs through the viewport. She tried to show them where they were going, when they might arrive. The curious cub watched with intense focus, chirping questions Rachel's translator struggled to interpret. After eating, the cubs began to explore their space more thoroughly. The rescue pod was designed to be comfortable for multiple days if needed, with padded surfaces, adjustable restraints that could be loosened for movement, and entertainment screens built into the walls. Rachel activated the screens and pulled up files of Marathi nature documentaries, shows designed for cubs their age. The reaction was immediate and joyful. All 4 cubs crowded around the screens, making excited sounds, temporarily forgetting their fear in the delight of familiar entertainment. She smiled watching them. They were just kids. Take away the crisis and the fear, and they were just children who liked cartoons and stories like any youngsters in the galaxy. The hours passed more easily after that. Rachel maintained her routine, visible but not intrusive. She talked to them through the pod's communication system, narrating her activities, telling them stories about her own travels, describing the worlds she had visited. Her voice became background comfort, constant and calm. The curious cub remained fascinated by everything. It watched Rachel prepare meals, asking questions in rapid chirps. It studied how the ship's controls worked, how Rachel navigated, what all the blinking lights meant. Rachel answered as best she could, grateful for the translator's improving accuracy. The eldest cub took on the role of asking practical questions. Where were they going? When would they arrive? Would there be other Marathi there? Rachel answered honestly, showing him the communication log she was preparing, the contact information for Marathi authorities. Building trust through transparency. The sick cub spent most of the time resting, but Rachel could see improvement with each passing hour. The fever stayed down. The wound showed no signs of infection returning. Movement became easier. By the second day, it was grooming itself and playing gently with the others. The smallest cub watched everything from its safe corner, but gradually, incrementally, moved closer to the transparent wall that separated the pod from the rest of the ship, curiosity battling with fear inch by inch. On the 3rd day, something unexpected happened. Rachel was eating her own meal, sitting cross-legged on the floor near the rescue pod's viewport, when the smallest cub approached the wall from inside. It sat down directly across from Rachel, separated only by the transparent barrier. They looked at each other for a long moment. Then the smallest cub did something that made Rachel's breath catch. It placed its paw against the wall, right where Rachel's hand rested on the other side, not quite touching but as close as possible with the barrier between them. Rachel smiled gently. She didn't move, didn't speak, just accepted the offered connection. The cub kept its paw there for several minutes before retreating, but when it went back to its siblings, Rachel could see the change. The smallest one stood a little taller, a little braver. It had faced the apex predator and survived. It had chosen connection over fear. Later that day, Rachel received confirmation from the Marathi authorities. A rescue ship was en route to the communication relay. They would arrive within hours of Rachel's estimated time. The cubs would be going home. Rachel told them the news, showing them images of Marathi ships, explaining that their own people were coming for them. The reaction was mixed. Joy at going home, but also something else. The eldest cub made a sound and the translator offered, "Stay time? With safe family?" Rachel understood. They wanted to know if she would stay with them until the transfer. If the predator who had become pack would see them safely home. "Yes," she promised. "I'll stay until you're with your family. I won't leave before that." The eldest seemed satisfied. He groomed his siblings calmly, passing on the reassurance. The ship reached the communication relay on schedule. Rachel docked carefully, aware that she was carrying precious cargo. The relay station's automated systems welcomed her, provided docking support, confirmed the incoming Marathi vessel. Rachel sat with the cubs through the viewport while they waited. She told them about their families, how worried everyone must have been, how happy they would be to see the cubs safe. She talked about the station, about the adults who had to leave them behind, explaining it wasn't abandonment but impossible choice. The translator struggled with some concepts, but the cubs seemed to understand enough. When the Marathi ship appeared on the scanners, all 4 cubs made excited sounds. Home, family, safety that didn't require trusting predators. Rachel prepared them for transfer, checking one last time that the sick cub's wound was healing properly, that everyone was fed and groomed and ready. The eldest helped her, having learned over 3 days how to work with human hands instead of against them. The Marathi ship docked on the opposite side of the relay station. Rachel would transfer the cubs through the station's central hub, a neutral space where both species could meet safely. She opened the rescue pod for the first time since leaving the station. The cubs hesitated. They could leave now, walk away from the human, return to their own kind. But they didn't bolt. They waited, looking at Rachel for guidance. She knelt down to their level one last time. "You were very brave," she said softly. "All of you. I'm proud of you." The curious cub chirped and bumped its head against her hand. Deliberate contact, affectionate. The sick one touched her knee gently, making a sound the translator rendered as grateful thanks. Even the smallest one approached, though it still kept careful distance and made a tiny chirping sound that might have been goodbye. The eldest sat in front of Rachel and looked her in the eyes. That prey-predator taboo broken completely. He made a complex sound, long and formal. The translator worked hard. You saved, you protected, you family, not forget, story tell, honor give. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. She nodded. Honor received. Not forget also. She stood and led them through her ship to the airlock. The Marathi rescue team waited on the other side. Adult faces showing every emotion from relief to confusion. They had expected traumatized cubs, possibly injured or disturbed cubs. Instead, they found 4 youngsters walking calmly beside a human, showing no signs of the terror that should have paralyzed them. The cubs ran to their own people with cries of joy, were scooped up into many armed embraces, covered in grooming licks and comfort scents. Rachel watched from the airlock, smiling despite the ache in her chest. This was right. This was how it should end. The Marathi medical officer approached her cautiously, respect and wariness in equal measure. "Human Rachel," she said through the translator. "The cubs are healthy. You did well." "They did well," Rachel corrected. "They were braver than anyone should have to be." The officer studied her for a moment. "They say you are safe family. They say the predator chose to protect. This is difficult concept for us." Rachel smiled. "It's a difficult concept for us sometimes too, but we try." The officer made a gesture that might have been a bow. "The Marathi Council will hear this story. We'll consider meaning. You have given us something new to understand about humans." Rachel nodded. She looked past the officer to where the cubs were being loaded onto the Marathi ship, surrounded by their rescuers. The eldest broke away for a moment, ran back to Rachel, and made that head bump greeting against her leg one final time. Then he chirped and ran back to his people. Rachel watched them go, 4 small shapes disappearing into the safety of their own kind. The airlock sealed. The Marathi ship undocked. Soon they were just a point of light accelerating away toward home. Rachel returned to her pilot's seat, suddenly aware of how quiet her ship felt. She pulled up her logs and began writing her report, documenting everything that had happened. The scientific community would want details. The diplomatic corps would want analysis. Everyone would want to know how a human had managed to gain the trust of the most fear-reactive species in known space. But as she wrote, Rachel kept coming back to one simple truth. She hadn't used any special technique or clever manipulation. She had just chosen patience over force, gentleness over power, trust over dominance. She had shown those cubs that predators could make different choices. And maybe that was the real story. Not that humans were good at being predators, but that they were even better at choosing not to be. 3 months after the rescue, Rachel was cataloging deep space bacteria samples in her lab when the communication alert chimed. She almost ignored it, deep in concentration on a particularly interesting microbe colony. But something made her check the sender identification. Marathi Council of Child Welfare. Official communication. Rachel opened the message with curiosity. What appeared on her screen made her smile. It was a video file, marked with symbols her translator indicated meant public record, educational purpose. She pressed play. The screen filled with a Marathi classroom, dozens of cubs sitting in neat rows, their teacher standing at the front. But the image that dominated the teaching screen behind the instructor made Rachel's breath catch. It was her, a captured image from station security footage showing her kneeling beside the sick cub, medical kit open, face gentle with concentration. The teacher was speaking and Rachel's translator worked to keep up. "This is human Rachel. She is apex predator species. Her people hunt and track and pursue. They have forward-facing eyes and strong bodies and persistent nature. Everything in our instincts tells us to fear humans." The cubs in the classroom made nervous sounds. One small one tried to hide under its desk. The teacher continued. But when human Rachel found cubs alone and afraid, she did not hunt. She did not harm. She chose different way. Today, 4 special cubs will tell you story of what happened. 4 familiar shapes walked to the front of the classroom. Rachel's hand went to her mouth, her cubs. So much bigger now, healthier, confident. The eldest stood tallest. The curious one bounced with energy. The formerly sick one moved without any sign of injury. And the smallest one walked with head high instead of cowering. The eldest spoke first, his voice clear and steady. My name is Tillo. 3 moon cycles ago I thought I would die. Not from sickness or accident, but from fear itself. He told the story simply but with vivid detail. The abandoned station, the hunger, the terror of being alone, the moment when the human face appeared in the window and every instinct screamed predator. The other 3 cubs added their parts, building the narrative together. She hummed our comfort songs, said the curious one, whose name Rachel learned was Palm. She tried to speak our language even though her voice was wrong-shaped for it. She tried to show us she understood our fear. She healed me when I was dying, said the formerly sick cub called Bree. She could have eaten me. I was weak, easy prey, but she chose gentle hands instead of sharp teeth. The smallest one, whose name was Nara, spoke last. I was most afraid. I could not move, could not think, could only fear, but she waited for me. The apex predator waited for the smallest prey. That is not how predators behave. That is how family behaves. Tilo took over again. Human Rachel taught us something important. She taught us that instincts can be wrong. That fear, even reasonable fear, can blind us to truth. She is predator, yes, but she is also protector. Both things at the same time. The teacher addressed the class. This is new understanding for Marathi people. We have always thought predator species are dangerous to be avoided. Humans especially trigger our fear responses. But these 4 cubs survived because they learned to see past their instincts. They learned that choice matters more than nature. A small cub in the front row raised its paw. But teacher, are humans safe now? Can we trust them? The teacher looked thoughtful. Humans are still predators. Their nature has not changed. But they choose what to do with that nature. Human Rachel could have ignored the distress call. She could have sedated the cubs and transported them like cargo. She could have let fear make her rough instead of gentle, but she chose differently, and that choice makes all the difference. The video showed Palm stepping forward. I learned that scary and dangerous are not same thing. Humans look scary to us, but human Rachel was not dangerous. She was safest thing in the universe when we needed her. Bree added, she told me about her own child cub who died. She was sad inside, carrying grief, but she still chose to help us. That is strength we Marathi do not have word for. The teacher gestured to a large screen that now showed statistics, charts, information that Rachel's translators struggled to interpret fast enough. But she caught the key points. Human Marathi interactions were being reevaluated. New protocols for cooperation were being developed. Exchange programs were being proposed. All because 4 cubs had survived an encounter that should have traumatized them permanently. The video shifted to show a ceremony. The Marathi council chamber, formal and impressive, filled with adults in official garments. The 4 cubs stood at the center, and to Rachel's surprise, a holographic image of her stood beside them. An elderly Marathi official spoke, his voice grave and important. We honor human Rachel Okonkwo, who saved 4 lives when her own instincts would have told her to claim them. We honor the cubs who learned to trust despite fear. Together they have shown us new possibility for our place in the galaxy. The official placed ceremonial medallions around each cub's neck, then approached Rachel's hologram and made a complex gesture. Though she is not present, we grant her the title of Honor Pack. She is family to all Marathi now, welcome in any home, trusted in all places. This is highest gift we can give to any being. The classroom erupted in chirping applause. The video ended with the 4 cubs looking directly at the camera, at Rachel, making sounds of greeting and gratitude that needed no translation. Rachel sat back in her chair, overwhelmed. She had known the rescue meant something, but this was cultural change, diplomatic revolution, the beginning of something entirely new between species. Her computer chimed again. Another message, this one personal rather than official. She opened it to find a simple text note. Safe Mother Rachel. We grow strong. We learn much. We tell your story to all who will listen. The galaxy is changing because you chose patience, because you chose us. Thank you for showing Marathi people that we can be brave enough to trust. Your cubs always, Tillo, Palm, Bree, Nara. Attached to the message were photos. The cubs in school learning and playing. The cubs with their families surrounded by love and safety. The cubs wearing their medallions proudly. Teachers and leaders in their own right now. Helping other young Morathi understand that fear could be overcome. Rachel smiled through tears she didn't try to hide. This was why she did this work. Not for glory or recognition, but for these moments. For proof that the galaxy could be more than its worst instincts. That understanding could bridge even the widest gaps between species. Her computer chimed one more time. This message was from the Human Diplomatic Corps, and it was marked urgent. Rachel opened it with some trepidation. Official messages usually meant paperwork and explanations and justifications for actions taken in crisis. But this message was different. It was a commendation, a formal recognition of her actions. But more than that, it was a request. Other species were reaching out, curious about humans, wanting to understand this contradiction of predator and protector. Would Rachel be willing to serve as a cultural liaison? To help build bridges between humanity and the prey species that found humans so frightening? Rachel looked at the photos of her cubs one more time. 4 small beings who had changed the galaxy just by learning to trust. 4 children who had been brave enough to see past their fear and find the truth underneath. She typed her response. Yes, she would help. She would keep building those bridges, one frightened child at a time if necessary, because that was what humans could offer the galaxy. Not the terror of the apex predator, but the choice to be something more. Her communicator buzzed with an incoming call request, real time, which meant someone paying for expensive bandwidth across light years. She accepted the call and her screen filled with a familiar face. Tillo, the eldest cub, now looking even more grown up than in the photos. "Safe, Mother," he chirped, excitement evident even through the translator's mechanical rendering. "You saw the teaching video?" "I did," Rachel said warmly. "You all spoke so well." "I'm proud of you." "We practiced many times," Tillo admitted. "Want to get story right. Want other cubs to understand like we understand now. But Rachel, there is news. Important news." Rachel leaned forward. "What news?" "The Council is creating exchange program. Morathi cubs will visit human worlds, learn about your people. Human young will come to Talos 7, learn about us, breaking down fear through understanding. They want you to help organize it." Rachel felt her eyes widen. That's incredible. "But Tillo, are you sure the cubs will be ready for that? Meeting humans is still frightening for your people." Tillo's expression became serious, wise beyond his young years. "Is frightening, yes. But we learned that fear is not reason to avoid something. Fear is reason to be careful, to be thoughtful, but not to hide. If we had let fear win in that station, we would have died. You taught us that being brave means facing fear, not having no fear at all." Behind Tillo, Rachel could see the other 3 cubs crowding into view. Palm chirped excitedly. "I want to visit human world." "Want to see everything. Will humans let me investigate their ship controls?" Bree added more calmly. "I study medicine now. Want to learn human healing techniques. You saved my life with them. Want to save others the same way." Even Nara, the smallest and once most frightened, spoke up. "Want to help other scared cubs learn to be brave. If I can trust human, any Morathi can learn to trust." Rachel felt emotion swell in her chest. These cubs, these brave, brilliant children, were going to change their entire culture's relationship with humanity, all because they had faced their worst fear and found compassion on the other side. "I would be honored to help with the exchange program," Rachel said. "But I have one condition. You 4 need to be part of it. You're the experts now. You're the ones who understand both sides." Tillo made a sound that might have been a laugh. "We already told the council we want to help. They could not say no to cubs who survived the impossible." They talked for another hour, planning and dreaming and imagining a future where Morathi and humans worked together instead of avoiding each other, where prey species and predator species found common ground in curiosity and cooperation, instead of hiding behind instinctive fear. When the call ended, Rachel sat in the comfortable silence of her lab. She thought about the path that had led her here, the daughter she had lost, the grief that had driven her to help other children, the distress call that had changed everything. She thought about the galaxy she lived in, full of species that had evolved so differently, carrying so many different instincts and fears and assumptions, but also full of possibility. If beings were brave enough to look past those instincts and see each other clearly, humans were predators. That would never change. The forward-facing eyes, the tracking ability, the persistence, all the traits that evolution had given them for hunting would always be part of who they were. But they were also capable of choosing something else. of seeing the frightened child instead of the easy prey, of using their strength to protect instead of harm. Rachel pulled up her files and began writing a new research proposal. A comprehensive study of fear responses across species and how to overcome them. Educational materials for both human and prey species children, teaching them to understand each other. Training protocols for crisis responders like herself, showing them how to build trust even in the most frightening circumstances. She worked late into the night, and she was still working when another message arrived. This one was from an unexpected source. The Council of Prey Species, the organization that represented dozens of species who shared that evolutionary history of being hunted rather than hunter. The message was formal, careful, but also warm. They had heard the story of Rachel and the cubs. They wanted to open dialogue with humanity. They wanted to explore what it might mean to have apex predators as allies instead of threats. They were proposing a summit, representatives from prey species and from humanity, coming together to discuss cooperation. And they were specifically requesting that Rachel attend, along with 4 young Marathi, who had proven that trust was possible even across the widest evolutionary divide. Rachel smiled and began drafting her acceptance. She looked at the photos of her cubs one more time, at their proud faces and confident stances. They had started this change, these 4 small beings who had chosen courage over fear. Now the entire galaxy was beginning to follow their lead. The summit would be challenging. There would be misunderstandings and difficulties and moments when instinct tried to override reason. But Rachel had learned something important in that station. She had learned that patience worked, that gentleness was its own kind of strength, that predators could choose to be protectors. The galaxy was full of species who had evolved as hunters, and species who had evolved as prey. For millions of years, those categories had seemed absolute, unchangeable. But 4 cubs and 1 human had proven that choice mattered more than instinct, that fear could be overcome, that the scariest thing in the universe could become the safest thing, if it chose to be. Rachel saved her work and prepared her ship for the next journey, to the summit, to the future, to a galaxy that was learning to see past its oldest fears and find something new, something better. She thought about what Tillo had said in that classroom, that she was predator and protector both, that both things could be true at the same time. It was a lesson humanity had learned slowly, painfully over countless generations. The lesson that strength was meaningless without compassion, that the ability to harm meant nothing compared to the choice not to. As her ship's engines powered up, Rachel looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 4 cubs were telling their story to anyone who would listen, changing minds, challenging assumptions, proving that the impossible was just the difficult that nobody had tried yet. And somewhere out there, millions of prey species were hearing that story and wondering if maybe, just maybe, the predators could be trusted after all, if the apex could choose to be allies, if the galaxy could be more than the sum of its fears. Rachel set her course and engaged the drive. The stars stretched into lines of light, and she flew toward a future that 4 brave cubs and 1 persistent human had made possible. The future where monsters chose to be heroes instead, where the predator stayed to protect, where fear gave way to trust, one small step at a time. It was a future worth fighting for, worth building, worth believing in, and it had started with a simple choice in a dark station, when an apex predator looked at frightened cubs and decided that some things mattered more than instinct. Some things, like the chance to save 4 small lives and change an entire galaxy. Rachel smiled and flew on toward tomorrow.